That's the truth. Okay, I want to talk about land grabs. I want to start off by stretching the framework a bit, but it's in the interest of building alliances, so I hope you bear with me. I think that starting yesterday, we looked at land grabs and all their sort of different forms at the tip of the iceberg, or the tip of the rhizome, if you like, of a much larger process of capital expansion and concentration. But I would also submit that they're also a reflection of capitalism's cyclical crises of overaccumulation. No market for goods or no outlet for investment, and land grabs solve that problem in different ways. And I'd like to invite us to consider land grabs as an integral part of the global corporate food regime that is probably here to stay. And also consider that they take place both in the global south and in the global north, and I'll be addressing two cases in the north. That they bridge the rural and the urban, and I'll be addressing urban land grabs. And they include speculative as well as productive activities, and in order to both accumulate capital and to dispose of excess capital. So in the United States, where our research in this is based, the food crisis is also an enabling discourse for urban land grabs in the United States. And because we do have 50 million hungry people, or food insecure, as the USDA likes to call them. It's about a sixth of our population, which basically mirrors the global situation as well. But we also have an epidemic of diet-related diseases, childhood obesity, and which fall primarily hardest upon the poor and underserved in the country, and which cost our healthcare system something like $150 billion a year. So it is a serious crisis. The government response has been, from the Obama administration, has been a commitment to end food deserts by the end of the second term, to lower childhood obesity and lower the incidence of diet-related diseases, and he's launched a thing called the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, among other things. Michelle Obama planted an organic garden and signed an MOU with Walmart to make their foods more healthy. The retail response, the corporate response, has been sort of a light stampede back to the underserved communities that they abandoned 2 decades ago in the inner cities, and a very high-profile public promise to eradicate food deserts and offer cheap, healthy food. Now they want to access some of the stimulus packages which have come along with the recession, and certainly are asking for tax breaks and access to the cheap urban land, which is presently undervalued following the crash of the real estate market. The other thing is that these large retailers primarily need to reinvest the windfall profits they made with the 2008 food crisis, and that they're making again now with the 2010 food price crisis. They don't know where to put all this profit, quite frankly. So the inner city is one place. They've also saturated, being fairly monopolistic, they've saturated the rural and suburban markets. There's nowhere else to go. They're forced to go back into the city, which is a difficult thing to do, otherwise they would have done it already much longer ago. So we see Walmart adopting small formats like Tesco, dropping down from 2,000 foot, 200,000 foot formats to 10,000 foot format or something like that, in order to get back into the inner city. So we see sort of between northern and southern land grabs, the rural and urban, we see sort of familiar discourse, familiar financial drivers, and familiar private sector actors. But does that mean we have a common struggle? I don't know. The two cases that we looked at, one in West Oakland and one in Detroit, that we're looking at the behest of comrades in the food justice movement. We don't really have a food sovereignty movement in the U.S. There's different reasons for that, mostly because the only people who understand the term food sovereignty are the National Family Farm Coalition and organic intellectuals. But in West Oakland, where we have our offices actually at Food First, This is part of the city with 32,000 people. It's one of the poorest neighborhoods. It's vies for the highest rate of homicide with Detroit yearly to see who gets the award. However, the biggest killer in West Oakland is type 2 diabetes. It's not gunshot wounds. It has the largest food desert probably in California. Nonetheless, the poor spend $65 million a year in that community on food. $48 million floats out of the community. There are no stores in the community to buy food other than Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's, which is why we have the diet-related diseases. That's equivalent to about 1,000 middle-class jobs, making $45,000 a year. So this is really a significant amount of wealth from the food dollar, which is sucked out of the community. Now there's a very strong food justice movement within Oakland. There's a Food Policy Council, there's a Food and Fitness Collaborative, there are different cooperative models for retail which have been advanced. Nonetheless, the city decided to invite in Kroger's to set up retail operations in the food desert. Kroger's has a very low-end label called Foodsco. People say where the meat is green and the vegetables are brown. They had to change the regulations in order to use the right of eminent domain in order to expropriate 5 acres of land for Kroger's, and they have offered up to $7 million in stimulus funds. In Detroit, Michigan, the other case we're looking at is another post-industrial wasteland. But they have about 800,000 people, but they have 200,000 abandoned lots in the city. Very large African-American population farming many of these lots. A study was done that said that the 30,000 vacant acres within the city could produce as much as 75% of the city's vegetables and 45% of its fruit. So, a speculator named John Hans, a millionaire from Detroit, decided to launch an industrial urban agriculture project in Detroit. And he says, what's the problem? Why doesn't it get better? Well, we have many problems, but one comes down to real estate. We don't have scarcity. What I mean is, there's no reason to buy real estate in Detroit. Every year it just gets cheaper. We need to create scarcity. Because until we get a stabilized market, there's no reason for entrepreneurs or other people to start buying. That's John Hans, the president of Hans Farms, which hasn't grown anything yet, but has managed to raise the price of land in Detroit just by threatening to turn it into an industrial agricultural garden. He's promising $30 million in investment. Of course, he wants good tax rates and special zoning, and wants to pay only $3,000 an acre for urban property. And he expects the city of Detroit to foreclose on a lot of the tax delinquent properties and come up with at least 30% of the land. Now, there's pushback from the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, who said, we're concerned about the corporate takeover of the urban agriculture movement in Detroit. At this point, the key players with him seem to all be white men in a city that's at least 82% black.
2 minutes there.
Oh, God. So, where is this coming from? The nature of the land grabs in both the North and South, I think, reflect on one hand the mobility of capital, as well as the entrepreneurial nature of the neoliberal state under a flexible regime of flexible capital accumulation. Because urban land serves as a particularly flexible means of profit and refuge for only over-accumulated capital. And following periods of economic boom and during periods of low profitability and other investments in recessionary times, businesses can invest in urban properties and then ship the capital back into commercial and industrial markets as the opportunities arise. What they're taking advantage of is what they call unemployed land. Does it sound familiar? Basically, they're looking to catch the differential on land rents, between undervalued land and the true rent that land should be valued at. So they buy it cheap, speculate with it cheap. When it could be producing much higher, they hope to capture that rent. These are facilitated by the entrepreneurial state, which has an expression at the municipal level now. Basically, the municipalities have ceased to be managerial and now are entrepreneurial modes of urban governance. And basically, cities are in competition with each other to see who can offer more incentives for investment to capital within their sort of bombed-out economies. So this we call this rollout neoliberalism. To conclude, I just say that both in the north and the south, northern and southern, rural and urban land grabs, while different in terms of the populations and the points in the value chain they affect, have important similarities in terms of why they occur and whom they serve. They also are increasingly a major issue for both the food sovereignty and food justice movements, despite these movements' demographic and geographic differences. So I think this maybe offers possibilities for alliances and certain types of convergence between these movements, and I would submit that it's probably necessary. So I think it's worth exploring and certainly incorporating into our research frameworks to be able to feed this possibility.
Thank you very much.